Hello, my name is Hunter Dietrich, and I will be presenting to you today the funeral customs of the ancient Egyptians. So let's go ahead and get started. So to begin our journey, we're going to talk about Anubis, or the god of the dead. In ancient Egyptian culture, he was represented as a jackal with the body of a man, as shown in these three photos to the right. He guides the souls of the dead to their final resting place. So his name means embalmer, and another name that they would also use for him was Anpu, and his sole purpose was to help guide a soul once they died into their journey to the afterlife. And then another big role that he had was he would help weigh the souls of the dead to see if they were worthy of paradise or if they were worthy of what we now call today purgatory. So as we continue on, the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead was very important to the Egyptians because it was their funerary text that was written in 1650 BC. It was written on papyrus, which was the type of paper made from the stem of a papyrus plant, and it talks about the steps to embalm a person to prepare them for their journey through the afterlife, as well as the path that leads ahead. And so it was basically a giant instruction manual that told them how to mummify a body, as well as what was going to happen once they died, so they could be prepared. It was written on papyrus, which was a very textured type of paper made out of the stems of a papyrus plant, so it wasn't like our smooth paper we have today. The middle photo here you can see is a page out of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and it depicts Anubis, the god of the dead, weighing a soul's heart to see if they are worthy of paradise. So, the really cool thing about the Egyptian Book of the Dead is that it was not written like normal books are written today. They filled it top to bottom with hieroglyphs, which were their form of alphabet, and it was instructions and directions and everything you were going to expect from basically the moment that you died. So the moment that you died, it followed step by step through what was going to happen to you and everything that you should expect. It was filled top to bottom. It was written on horizontally and vertically, and it's just jam-packed full of all the information that you could possibly fathom. From death to the afterlife the journey was always a very hard and treacherous one, but if your heart weighs well against Anubis, then you would be accepted into your paradise. So the ancient Egyptians believed that it was essential to prepare for the afterlife during life. So the afterlife was like the life they had lived while they were alive, but entry was never guaranteed. So they would take the journey, and if their heart weighed true, they would then be able to go to their paradise, but if it did not, they went to what we call nowadays as purgatory. It was a very treacherous path up to the final judgment, and most people would purchase small funerary items that they could be placed in their tomb with them. So they believed that anything that was left in the tomb with them would be waiting for them in the afterlife once they died. So items that they purchased consisted of amulets, funerary texts, food, clothing, and small statues called shapsis. So like their amulets would be a scarab beetle because they believed that if you placed it over your heart, it would keep your heart true and protect it. The most important item that they purchased in life, though, was the coffin, or as they called it, their chests of life. Most of the coffin was covered in prayers and parts of funeral texts that would protect the body and the spirit in death. It often took years to complete these, as well as the tombs, and so it was very important for them to be commissioned in life, so they would be completed before the person died. The tombs were built on the western banks of the Nile in the land of the dead, and some were very large, like the Great Pyramids, while others were not, like mastabas and rock-cut tombs. So moving on, we're going to go into the steps of mummification. So this ancient process dates back to the 2600 BCE, but it is no longer practiced today in Egypt. They first began these steps to ensure that the spirit would be preserved for its journey through the afterlife, because they believed that if the body was not preserved, then the spirit would not be either. So the first step was obviously to make an announcement that the person had died. They would announce that the person was dead and that they were preparing them now for their mummification process and for burial and for their trip through the afterlife. Next, all of the major organs, except for the heart, so the stomach, the liver, the lungs, intestines, the brain, were all placed in these jars called the canopic jars, so the middle picture on the top row up there. And the heart was always left in the body because it was believed that it was the center of the person's being, as well as that is what Anubis, the god of the dead, would weigh to see if they were worthy of the afterlife or not. their paradise in the afterlife. Once all the organs were removed, the embalming process would begin. The body was covered in natron, which is a type of salt that they had, and then they would also place bags of it in the empty body cavity. So it was rubbed all over their skin and everything and placed in the body cavity, and it would be used to dry them out. So once the body would be completely dried out, the natron would be removed from the inside of the body and then washed off of the outside. And then once they were all clean from the natron and all of the organs that were supposed to be removed are removed, they were then cleaned and wrapped in linen. It was normally a white linen. And then the body was placed in the coffin that was inscribed with their name, titles, prayers, and funerary texts. So Egyptian elites were placed in coffins within another coffin, and sometimes they were placed in up to 8 coffins to help protect their body for their journey to the afterlife. And they believed, again, that if the body was not protected, the soul would not be either. So they went to great lengths to make sure that they were. The final procession would ensue after that, and these steps were completed. The body was then placed in a tomb for eternal rest, and they would not be removed again after that. Famous mummies in history that have been excavated by archaeologists are King Tutankhamun, or King Tut. He's one of the most famous ones that we have seen today. Queen Hatshepsut, she's another very famous one, as well as King Thutmose III and King Seti I. King Ramesses III was also a very prominent member that we were able to excavate, as well as Queen Nefertari. So, burial in ancient Egypt. There was always 3 types of tombs in ancient Egypt: the pyramids, the mastabas, and the rock-cut chambers. So the pyramids were used as tombs for pharaohs and prominent members of ancient Egypt, so somebody with a lot of money, basically, or if they were very important. The oldest pyramid is still standing in Egypt today, and it's the Great Pyramid, and it is the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu. It is also considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. A mastabas is another form of tomb that was used, and it is a flat roof structure, so the top photo on the left, and it was a flat roof structure that is shaped like a rectangle and the sides slope inward. It is constructed out of mud brick, but then it was then later constructed out of stone to help it last longer, and there was a downward shaft that leads down into the burial chamber. And the third and final type of tomb was the rock-cut chamber. This is a tomb that is cut into already existing stone, like a cliff or even stone on the ground, and then they would slope down, or they would just clear out of room inside of the side of the wall of rock, and that would be the tomb for the person. So, in the ancient art of embalming, in ancient Egypt, they did not use a mixture of chemicals like we do today, but instead they used natron, or a special type of salt. So when natron was used to dry out the body to mummify it, if the body was not completely dried out, it would not maintain. Your body would basically rot like it would if you weren't mummified. So in order to maintain the body, the natron had to be left in there until the body was completely dried out, and they believe that if the body remained in good condition, then so did the soul. Below here, you can see that we have a couple photos of the most famous pharaoh that they have found by archaeologists, and his name is King Tut, or King Tutankhamun. So in the first photo here, there is Howard Carter, which is the man that discovered King Tut's tomb. And then in the second photo is the mummy of King Tut after he was removed from all of his sarcophagi, as well as his coffins, and he was placed in a lab to run tests. And then a little bit of a fun fact about King Tut is that his embalming was done wrong. So the oils used during the process were not correct, and so he was not properly mummified, and he did not properly dry out, so his body did rot a little bit. Why is ancient Egyptian culture worth learning? So one very important contribution that ancient Egyptian death culture led us to was in the world today is the construction of the pyramids as tombs. These helped lead to the creation of other types of tombs like mausoleums and crypts. Along with this, they also helped the world understand more about immortality and that aspect of their religion and different religious practices in different cultures. And then also on a little bit of a side note, ancient Egyptians also created ink and paper, the first ink and paper that we can find, cosmetics, as well as toothbrushes and toothpaste, and the modern day breath mint. So that was just a little bit of a fun fact for you. The ancient Egyptians taught the world today about the journey after death, the importance of preparing for death, as well as respecting and honoring the dead. They were big on the respect and the honoring of their dead because they believed that everything that happened to them in life would lead up to whether they were worthy of their paradise or not. And so they always respected their dead and they always did their best to take care of them. With their help and guidance from the past, we can now plan our funerals today early on. We have our pre-need counseling as well as just funeral arrangements when somebody passes. We are able to preserve our dead better. We don't use natron anymore, but we have learned from them and created the embalming process with fluids and chemicals. And we've also learned to respect whatever journey that person chooses to go on after death. So whether you're Christian, Catholic, pagan, anything, we have been taught by ancient Egyptian culture as well as other cultures to respect everybody's religious beliefs and the journey that they are going to take into death. And here's my Works Cited page. Thank you so much for sitting and listening to me, and have a good night.